Welcome to Legacy Makers, a conversation for dads. This is a space for building community and for honest conversations about fatherhood, the wins, the struggles, and the responsibility of building something that outlives us. Each episode, we sit down with leaders, dads, and friends to talk about family, fatherhood, and the kind of men our kids need us to be, because legacy isn't accidental, it's built.
All right, Kev, we are back. It is the first ever fully virtual recording of Legacy Makers, a conversation for dads. You know, you're so busy, Kevin, that we couldn't get in a room together this time. And
I'm in Atlanta. Your dad and I are both in Atlanta, I think. I think it's you that are gone this time.
it is true. I want to start by saying I am pleasantly surprised, shocked might be the right word, that my dad was on here before I got on. There's no issues. I didn't get 5 calls about technical difficulties or how do I do this or the link didn't work. I want to acknowledge that, Dad, you are an almost 80-year-old millennial Gen Zer. Like tech is not, you're like a native tech guy.
Well, there was a reason for it, Eric. I got on at 9 o'clock this morning. I haven't gotten off, just waiting for you guys to get on.
For the record, that means he's been on for about 3 hours. So listen, we're going to roll in. We thank you all for continuing to listen on this journey as we think about legacy and in the kind of analogy of building a house. Last time we were together, Kevin, you and I talked about the importance of framing, something, again, you and I know nothing about from a construction perspective, but as we think about legacy, we think about being dads and building families, the importance of framing for the future. This one's personal for me, as listeners have probably been able to pick up. We are joined by my dad, Ira Blumenthal, who helped frame the legacy of my childhood and our family. And
can I just say this? I have been advocating for 2 years. So we got to get Ira on the podcast. Like we need Ira. So Ira, I need this. I think Eric's worried you may tell some embarrassing stories about him.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to give your listeners a special website to go to for all Eric's stories that I put in there. But
well, Dad, listen.
Yes, sir.
I want to get into some questions. Listen, as for all our listeners, it would take too long to go through all of the things of Ira Blumenthal. I kind of joke around with him. He's one of the most interesting men in the world. You'll pick up on his story as we have a conversation. He is a businessman. He's a writer. He's a speaker. He's a coach, played lacrosse, currently might be the oldest lacrosse youth coach in America, coaching one of my son Benny's 10-year-old teams. He's done a lot. He's lived a lot of lives in his almost 80 years, and someone certainly I admire, and I'm grateful for your influence, Dad. And just thanks for spending time. This is going to be great for our listeners. And I want to start here. So tell me, like, as you think about, again, we're going to talk about framing. When you hear that framing the future as a dad, what does it mean to you? What does that mean to you as a dad who has 5 children? I don't even know the latest grandchildren count. Like, what do you think about when you hear that, framing the future?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. There's not one answer, but I guess that framing the future is the deliberate process of defining, visualizing, perhaps structurally building or preparing for what's to come. So to me, it's all about tomorrow. It's all about what's next. And as a dad, any framing I do for any of my kids is all about helping be a dad, a mentor, a coach, a friend, a teacher, a buddy, a parent, and a catalyst for helping my kids have some sort of prosperous future. And prosperous is not about money, something that's fulfilling. So I guess my deliberately structurally building what's to come.
So this wasn't on the questions that we sent over. Kev, you can go after me, but so we had David Salyers, longtime exec at Chick-fil-A. He talked about legacy and his definition of legacy. I'm going to butcher it, but the gist of it was, and I'd never heard of it, and I want you to react to this. He talked about legacy as essentially momentum. Like, he views legacy as creating momentum for his children that they can then pick up that momentum and move on, like react to that. Because I thought that was a beautiful definition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which means that parents, dads need to be very, very intentional in what they do, because, there's an old expression, what they see is what they'll be, and whether it's philanthropy or whether it's helping a neighbor out or whether it's how you treat your spouse or whatever the case may be. So I think that David's words are right on the mark. Every dad has a responsibility to set the stage for their kids to succeed by virtue of what they do or what they don't do or what they say or what they don't say.
Very good. Very good.
Let me just, I want to say this for our listeners, because I think this is important. I mean, Eric, your dad, Ira, is one of the most successful business and brand guys that I know. Like, he is an author and a columnist and a speaker and has created all this. But the thing that's most impressive to me, Ira, is what you've done as a dad. I mean, Eric is amazing. Jeff is amazing. Ryan is amazing. I am curious, as you were framing, as they were growing up, what was the most important thing in that? And maybe even at the time you may not have had language for it, but what did you think really mattered most that you did back then that is showing up in how they're living today?
Well, I think it's understanding the difference between what and who. What you are as a ball player, a salesman, an executive, an advertiser. That's the what. The who is attached to a very important word called character. It's honesty, integrity, philanthropy, kindness, and on and on and on and on. And I was blessed with a dad and a mom who, always told me it's not important what you are. What's really important is who you are. Because in the end, it is about who. And I take great pride in both my bride and I always focusing on the who. It was about the who, and it's interesting. In no way, shape, or form trying to make this a morbid discussion, but we all have a dear friend named Mike Lynch. And Mike and I once had a discussion about eulogies. And Mike talked about the fact that no one gives a eulogy and says, well, he was all scholastic, okay, and he made a big sale and he built it. What do they talk about? They talk about how he cared. They talk about how he donated his time, how he taught, and how he mentored, and on and on. So I would say long-winded response, Kevin. I think the dads out there need to focus and need to absolutely obsess with their who. In the end, that's what's important to raising solid citizen children.
It's good.
It's good. That was good. I've heard that before, I think. I don't know who said it, but I think I heard that quite a bit growing up. So I want to shift a little bit around a vision. So, when you go to build a physical house, there's got to be some sort of vision. You don't just start to lay a foundation and put up random walls. You need to understand kind of what you're building. So a personal question, as you think about, we'll just start with my brothers and I, like, what kind of men did you set out to build as a dad when you were thinking about the actions and the conversations and what you were trying to instill in us? Like, what was your vision for that?
That's really interesting. Stephen Covey wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I think the most important habit is begin with the end in mind. When you were little boys, your mom and I sat around and kind of creatively visualized what we would hope our kids would become.
That's cool.
And that's critically important in building that house. Nobody builds you don't build a house, okay, with walls up there. You build a house, it's right on it's bare, it's ground. You think about what about the walls and where the rooms are and so forth. So, quite frankly, we thought about words such as character, integrity, respect for others, discipline, resilience, purpose, unconditional love, leadership, and on and on and on and on. And those were the words that seemed to be the panels, the windows, the doors, the floor, the roof in this house that we wanted to be a catalyst for our kids building. And that's what we thought about. To me, look, I'm blessed with 3 sons who are enormously successful, but as successful as they are in business, it's less important to me than when I see what my kids are doing, okay, in the community, or what they do with their children, or what they do with their neighbor, or what they do with charity, or what they do at church. So to me, Eric, that's about building the house. It was start with the end in mind and think about what was really important. And it was not about awards and trophies. It was about character.
Yeah. And I'll just say, and get to Kev's question, but I remember obviously you guys would be excited when we achieved things, whether it be scholastically or on the sports kind of front, but there was really never a conversation I remember having about achievement. Like I remember it always being about character things, whether it was like you played really well, but how you acted when you were on the bench, or I saw your teammates and how you lifted people up, or did you do your best being a good team, like those types of things. And I think I've taken that with the kids. I try to. I haven't always succeeded, but I think it's so much. We as dads, we can get wrapped up in like Junior is the best player on the team, and when that becomes like our focus, there's a undue pressure and implications, I think, to our kids and the legacy. So I appreciate you living that out.
Well, but it's interesting though, because far be it for me to say that the world is upside down, but I will say the world is upside down. I mean, right now we have parents of 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds that are trying to figure out how to get their kids scholarships to Division I schools when they're not thinking about, my boy really needs to understand good sportsmanship. He needs to understand work ethic. He needs to understand, having fun, and as a 79-year-old coaching fourth and fifth graders, little bit different perspective. I mean, to me, I think there's so much more than that trophy. What's really interesting too, as many trophies as we all given kids, okay, for athletics, taking them to Dairy Queen is the best thing that they could experience.
Yeah. Well, as the coach who doesn't have any kids, you do that, and then you get all the kids ice cream and you send them off to everybody. Yeah. So I get yours.
Yeah.
Kevin, you look like you're going to say something.
No, I have this same grandparent issue. That sounds like great advice when you get to send them home.
But there are grandparent rules. But I'll tell you an interesting story. Okay, not an Eric story, but a middle son Jeffrey story. Jeffrey was, like all three sons, basketball players. They all played in college. And Jeffrey was being recruited by some school. I couldn't even tell what it was. And the coach drove in 5-6 hours to see him play. Well, Jeffrey was injured that game, and Jeffrey sat on the bench. But you know what? Got to tell you, prouder than Jeffrey shooting a 3-point shot. He was sitting on the bench, and every time someone came off the court, he patted him on the back, and he jumped up and he screamed, and he was cheering on his team, and he was like the greatest teammate possible. And after the game, I went over to this college coach, and I said, gee, I'm sorry you came so far to see Jeffrey. And he said to me, Mr. Blumenthal, I saw everything I needed to see about him as an athlete and as a person. It was not about the basket. It was about, it's I've got a little grandson, okay, the other day he was playing t-ball and he ran over someone and he picked him up. That's character. Okay, that's character.
So I'm curious about this part of it, Ira, because what you're saying, you're talking about the character is more important than achievement in these areas. You have an amazing way with words. I'm really curious though, how do you make sure, let's just use Eric as an example. How do you make sure he felt that, not just heard that? Like what was it that you did to make sure he knew that it wasn't just words, that it mattered?
That's a good question. I'd like to think that my bride and I demonstrated, okay, and maybe, showed by example, don't know what was received, obviously, you try all that, I think it was also about having discussions about what was important, understand that we all go through issues in our life. I remember, I'm not sure which son it was, but, had a bad game, and after the game, when the handshake happened, he didn't shake the other team's hand. That was an important dad moment. Okay. And as a coach, I sat him down the next game because that's not the way we act. Okay. So I think by constantly reinforcing it, all right, and also surrounding ourselves with friends and neighbors and relatives who could reinforce the message. It's a great question. It's one you'd wish you could bottle up and sell to everyone, but I think it really is about example. And in the end, what's really important? What's really important is how you are to others, how hard you work, how much you care, and on and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to confirm that was not me who did that. It must have been Jeff or Ryan, but my money's probably on Ryan.
No, it was Ryan.
It was Ryan. It was actually on Ryan. Jeff wouldn't do that either. It was definitely Ryan, the baby.
I'm going to hear more about that later on.
But here's what I'll say. I mean, you kind of started with this. You said what they'll see is what they'll be, right? I mean, Kevin and I talk a lot about caught versus taught. That doesn't mean the words aren't important, but if the words are not consistently backed up with action, it does more damage than you even not saying the words. Like, honestly, like if you're going to choose one or the other, I would say, not that you want to choose one or the other, but if you had to, I would choose not saying it. You cannot be a hypocrite. Like, you do more damage saying this is important and then not acting on that than ever.
Yeah. That's a great point. But I think that one special trait for successful people is consistency.
Yeah.
It's consistency, and same thing with parent. I mean, Eric, you've got 4 children. You can't tell one you need to be in by 10 o'clock and let the other one come at 11 o'clock. I mean,
right.
You've got to figure out a way that they're all in some way, shape, or form. And, if someone does something that's dishonest, and kids will, just because they're kids, you've got to turn around and stand for that. And I think it's interesting. And whether you're a parent or whether you're an executive, consistency is absolutely critical. Yeah. Figure out who you are, what you stand for, and don't waver.
Erica, when he's saying that, I think about when we talk about framing and consistency, we need consistent boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Boundaries are very important for us. I mean, listen, I think about myself having boundaries to govern my life. Dad, as you think about boundaries as a dad, what comes to your mind when you think about that? Were there things that you had to do, whether it was how you operated at work or things with your travel or how you communicated to us? What boundaries did you put in place?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I don't believe that I would ever, I could never see any boundary worthy of honoring if it separated me from my children. Period. Done. End of story. Okay. And that's tough. It's tough for young executives, okay, when, you're building your career. But, Eric, you may remember vividly, consulting to Coke many years ago, there was an assignment that the president of Coke wanted me to take in Australia. And I turned around and I said, I can't do that. And I'm a paid consultant on retainer working for them. I can't do that. And he said, why? And I said, well, it's summer vacation. I don't want to be away from my kids. And he said to me, what would it take to get you to go to Australia? And I never realized he would bite on it. I said, send my family. Well, guess the next thing I know, 3 children, my wife and I were on a Qantas jet with a house in Sydney, Australia, because I was not going to compromise. That was not a boundary that I wanted. I mean, that was not something that was going to stop me in any way, shape, or form. There is nothing more important than your children. That's your job description. I don't care whether you're a vice president, a president, or this or that and the other thing in the end. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we let that slide. I think, I don't know if I answered your question.
Good. It's perfect.
Ira, you think about that boundary for you. I'm just curious, were there certain boundaries you set up for your kids, like things you wouldn't allow them to do? Like whether it was out of protection or control, I don't know. Like, were there certain things that they were or were not allowed to do?
Well, I think it's less about control. It was all about protection. Okay. I mean, that was my job. God gave me a job to be a good Christian, a good husband, a good father. And the toughest job, and I certainly wouldn't, say this in front of my bride, but the toughest job is being a good father, because, kids will get in trouble, crossing the street the wrong way, whatever the case may be, not because they're bad. So to me, it was about protection. And, that's not the easiest thing in the world, because sometimes at certain ages, they have no understanding as to why you're doing this, or, why can't I go to the party like everybody else, whatever the case may be. It was protection, strictly protection. And today, Kevin, even more than ever before, we, we don't need to go into the societal issues going on today, but if we don't protect those young kids, they may get in trouble, or someone else will get them in trouble. So it was protection.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And again, I can remember the tension and the friction that it caused, like with myself and my brothers. But looking back, like, and now being a dad myself, like, there's just some things that, Mike Lynch, we talk about a lot. Like, he talks a lot about that. Like, hey, you got to parent tight early, and then you let them loose when you kind of see that they've earned the right to have a little bit more leeway. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say before you move to the next one, there's somewhere I have a sign or, a flyer someplace that talked about, when I was 16 years old, my dad was an idiot. And when I was 19 years old, he had a couple of good ideas. And when I was 25, yeah, he was pretty bright. But now that I'm 30, my dad was a genius. We start realizing that this is why he told me not to do this. But go on, Eric. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. I want to shift a little bit to kind of load-bearing walls, right? And load-bearing walls in this analogy really are thinking about, like, what is non-negotiable, right? Load-bearing walls, you can't move. You want to do a bathroom remodel, you find out, look, I can't open it up because that wall right there, if we take that down, the whole roof's coming down. So talk a little bit about maybe a few of the values that were non-negotiable to you and Mom as you thought about the family. What do we want to be known for? What did you try to instill in us?
Well, maybe not answering your question exactly, but no yelling, no name calling, no personal insults. Okay, I think that Mom and I worked very hard. Okay, to try to teach by example. You grew up, okay, where Christmas Eve was a night where we celebrated with neighbors, but we also had boxes and buckets out front where everyone that came to our house made a donation that we would bring to the Must Center, or we'd bring someplace else. That was non-negotiable. Okay, so I think that some of the things that you talk about load bearing. We're trying to look at the visual there. I think your tone of voice, your facial expression, the words that you use, okay, are so critically important.
Yeah.
So critically important. There's 17 different ways you can say no. And some of them are kind, some of them are considerate, and some are not. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it actually felt good to me. So
it sounded good. It not only did it feel good, it sounded good. But I think it's right. Listen, it's convicting to me because I think that some of the things that you're talking about just there are the easiest to overlook because you're just in the moment. You're in the mode. I'm looking at something. I'm doing an email. And the kid does something and you react. And little do you know, like, these kids remember stuff and they remember how you make them feel. And you don't want to be like a guy. Dad yells all the time. That's a crappy thing.
But it's interesting though. There's a great expression from Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond. Could a greater miracle take place than to look through another's eyes for an instant? Wouldn't it be amazing to look through Camden's eyes when you're talking to him? Is he hearing what you're saying, or what does he really think about? And sometimes you stop and think, wait a minute now, did I say that right? Or maybe I should have taken a deep breath before I spoke, to the kids, or whatever the case may be. It's
good.
Let me ask this question, because Eric, in our last episode when we talked about framing, we spent a lot of time on the load-bearing walls. Like, what are the things that can be moved and can't be moved? We talked a lot about walls. I don't remember us talking a lot about windows or doors. But I would love to hit that with your dad, because I am curious, especially because I think about Camden being your oldest, George being my oldest. We have younger kids for the most part. But as the boys got older, how were you intentional about creating a place where there was an openness, where they could come to you with, Eric even being honest, with a problem or a challenge, or maybe something he did wrong? How did you guys do that?
That's a great question. Trial and error.
That's helpful.
It is, and probably a lot more error than trial. But It's interesting you say that. In our house, no different than a lot of other houses, since you're talking about houses, we have a living room. Okay. I don't know why they call it the living room, because we spend all our living in the family room. Okay. But, and then, of course, when you have a party, everyone's in the kitchen. God knows why. Okay. But that living room, as Eric will attest to, had two purposes: Christmas tree and presents, or you're in trouble. Okay.
Go to the living room.
I mean, yeah, if it was not Christmas and someone said, I need to talk to you in the living room, it was not about presents.
You did say, "Come, you need to step into my office." His office wasn't there. He actually had an office in the house, but we always knew the office was the living room, and we needed to come and probably need to go to the bathroom before, because we are going to be in there a while. You just got to have a whole conversation.
Now, there might have been a couple of positive or, cerebral moments in the living room, but I would tell you that it was likely, if I said to any of the boys, I'll meet you in the living room, they were not thinking about this being a good experience. And they said, did I do something, or was it you? In terms of that. But, I think that there have been some tough conversations that we've had. Raising kids, there's always a tough conversation in some way, shape, or form. I think the key, though, was try to respond calmly. Okay. Stay away from emotion. And we as adults, we can be emotional, needless to say. I think also maybe separating honesty from the issue itself. To me, it's funny. Many years ago, I read a book about Socrates, and Socrates was the master of questions. He got people to believe his philosophy by asking them questions. And I think as the boys got older, we would ask questions, and I'll be very candid with you. I remember, being raised, a Jewish kid from New York, when Eric came to me and said, Dad, I want to commit my life to Jesus Christ. Okay. That was a tough one for me. I mean, raised Jewish my whole life. And now my oldest son has made a decision. And if Eric remembers correctly, in that heavy discussion, it was all about questions. Well, Eric, I want you to answer 3 questions. Number 1, why are you doing this? Okay. And then number 2, you talked about baptism and what does that mean? And question number 3 is, how will that change you? It was not a lecture. And Kevin, he answered each one of them perfectly in a very profound manner. And there was no more discussion. So, I guess it's about working hard at being a great communicator with your kids, asking the right questions, let them talk, okay, and maybe even ask questions. You could turn around to your child and say, is it a good thing to hurt your brother? No. Okay. Then do you think that maybe hitting him with a baseball bat was inappropriate? I mean, you can get there without screaming and yelling and, in terms of that. But
I think it's good. I think hearing you talk about it, you're spot on. Like, didn't realize it then, but like the ability to ask questions, and it also allows your child to be an active participant in the situation versus a one-sided, all right, Dad is just lecturing, which I think is a really important thing as you continue. So let me ask you this, Dad. I think this is more of a personal question. Were there times, as you think about, you said consistency, like a lot of people undervalue consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember times like where you fell off, like that maybe you weren't delivering on what your expectations were of yourself? And how did you course correct if so?
That's a great question. Age, longevity, experience, and maturity does not mean we have all the answers. Okay. If so, right now, of this group on the phone right now, I'm the one with all the answers. Because I have decades. There were mistakes. There were mistakes, needless to say. And, to me, I started my work career out as a college coach, coaching football and lacrosse. And I had a wonderful, wonderful mentor, not Nick Saban, but Lou Saban, who was a distant uncle. And I was a young football coach, and he told me the most important tool that I have in my coaching basket, my bag, was the game films. The game films. whether you win or lose, looking at the game films, you can figure out, how do I course correct? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And I tried as best I could after an issue to look at the game film and almost ask myself, man, if God gave me a chance to talk to my son about that subject again, what would I do next time?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and sometimes you tried to course correct and move into it, or sometimes your mom would say, leave it alone, drop it, and move on. You know, but this is a continuous process. Okay,
Yeah.
God gave us a lot of things, but He never gave us the certificate about being the master dad. But I think you have to understand as a dad that you're human, you're going to make mistakes, and your kids will respect you more when you admit it.
So true.
That's so true. So I'm curious about this. Eric, you always speak about just how impressive your dad is, the things he's done. I would love, while we get the chance to be together on air here, now as a dad, Eric, what did your dad do right that you're trying to carry forward?
Yeah, look, I think it's a tough one to say, like it's this one thing. I think about the example that I had in my dad was somebody who, like, I never thought twice about sharing how I felt, right? Like, I didn't have to worry if I say this, I'm going to be, I don't know, labeled as weak, or you're not supposed to feel that way, or suck it up, or some of the stuff that I think a lot of, especially boys, struggle with. I never had that. And, I didn't realize how much of a blessing that was until you get older. And like my dad said, oftentimes you don't really appreciate until you have that perspective. But I think about some of the most impactful things for me as a husband, as a dad, as a leader at work. It's very natural to be authentic and to be who I am. And if I feel something, to share that. And people are like, man, like, thank you for modeling that. And it's like, I just didn't know that there was another way. And
Cool.
So there's a lot I could go into, but that has been, I think, an unlock for me in terms of again, husband, dad, leader, the authenticity, the license to be who I am, the license to share when I feel something without fear of judgment. I think has been a really special trait that I got, from my dad.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, I look at this guy and I could go, we could have a whole bunch of fun together. He could rip me and I could rip him, but he's an incredible dad, and he continues to be, taking that as a granddad. I think it's cool to watch. Not only do I get to see a great example of a dad, now I get to kind of see, okay, what's the right way to be a granddad at some point. Hopefully not for a very long time, but yeah.
But Kevin, you need to understand that it's not all roses and stuff. I mean, we put in a new swimming pool, and I sat down with all the grandkids, and I said, "Do not run because you're going to slip and fall. I take one step, I fall on my face. I am out."
Yeah, knocked himself out like day one opening pool party.
Opening day of the pool. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Eric, why don't I'll let you hit a couple, and then I have some rapid fire I'd like to do, but you.
Yeah. Dad, what do you try to, like, not be brief, but like try to pick one or two things, like when you're looking out, Sharon, Julie, myself, Ryan, Jeff, what do you feel like you got right? What do you think about when you think about, look, you're a little bit rear view mirror moment? What are some things you say, you know what, like, could have been better here? Obviously, we all could, but like, what are some things you're really proud of?
Success in life and business and parenting is all how you finish. I mean, I'm not a huge NBA fan, but if I was going to watch an NBA game, I'd turn it on to the last 30 seconds because that's all that matters. Okay. It's how you finish. And that's an interesting question. I'm going to answer it in a different way. When I look at the success that my daughter Julie has had as a teacher, okay, or my daughter Sharon as a university professor, or my son Ryan, okay, in his career, my son Jeffrey in his career, you, Eric. But more than that, how you all parent. You got to remember, I have 5 kids who are all parents, okay, and I see how they parent. And when I look at that, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, maybe I shouldn't, but I'm taking a lot of credit for it internally. I feel really, really good. I'll turn to your mom many times and said, we must have done something right. Don't know what it was. Wish I could bottle it. So to me, the very idea to look at my kids and to see, and again, not about the what. I mean, I have 3 sons that were all captain of their college basketball teams. That's a what. Okay.
Ira, which one was the best college basketball player?
In reality, it was me.
You're not going to hurt anybody's feelings, Dad.
It was me. It was me actually, and they didn't know I was taller when I was younger.
Ryan always encourages me to ask this question. That's why I asked this.
Well, look, right now, Eric and Jeffrey are tied with 4 kids. If they decide it's a great question to ask. It didn't matter, okay, because they were my sons, and whether they made the 3-point shot or not, yeah.
We kid about this, but I really do. I love that answer. Is that it didn't matter because they were your son, and I feel like what I've heard about your daughters, who I know about your sons, you raised them in a way that they felt the freedom to be who they are. And so I would just say this. I think you and Kim should take a lot of credit because you guys have done an amazing job.
Well, but Kevin, not to interrupt you, but from a side though, it's all about how you finish, and I look now, and I'm being very candid about this. I don't know that there's anything that those 5 children have done holistically to disappoint me, or gee, I wish they would have turned to the left or turned to the right or pursued a different career. I think that God has delivered a package of 4 or 5 kids, rather 5 kids in my mailbox. Did I say 4? Who did I eliminate? 5. I can't express how blessed I am.
Yeah.
And by who they are, who they become, how they care, and on and on and on. So I'm the most blessed guy on the planet.
I want to do this. I'm going to do 4 rapid fire ones. So these are going to be fast answers. Then I'm going to let Eric. It's your dad, so you get to bring it home on this.
All right, so it's true, A, and B.
All right.
Those are the answers.
Ira, number 1, what is one value every home must have?
Love.
Love. I love it. What is the biggest mistake dads make today?
Focus on anything other than their children.
As you look back on being a dad, what is something that matters more than we think?
Being there. Presence. Being there. Regardless of how you define there, okay, being there. Good times, bad times, up times, successful times, not so successful times, being there.
Eric and I want to be encouragers to dads because there's a lot on their plate. It feels, and sometimes even something like this can feel like they're adding to the list. I would be curious, what is something that matters less than we think? Like, what's the thing that's stressing dads out that they really shouldn't worry about as much?
Well, I want to be consistent, though. I said consistency was important. I'd go back to the what. I mean, I'm proud of what I've done in my career, in my life. But you want to know something? It's not important. It's trophies break. Certificates are misplaced. I think it's really about the love and the togetherness. I've made this statement before. Okay. Be the best dad you possibly can be. All right. It is absolutely your job. It is absolutely your job in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if I'm.
No, it's good. It's good. It's really good, Dad. So this is where we're gonna kind of land the plane here. So think about this. You're talking to a dad maybe that has got an 8 and a 10-year-old, a 4 and a 6-year-old, even a 16 and an 18-year-old. and they're feeling discouraged. They're feeling discouraged about where they are, what they're not able to do at home. They're trying to balance career and marriage and being a dad. Like, you've said a whole bunch here that's going to be an encouragement, so it's okay to restate something. But like, what would you say? You're having coffee with somebody that says, "Man, I've got these kids in the house, and I'm just not winning." What would you say to them?
Be a supporter in what they need your support in. I mean, there are some kids that love catching a ball and hitting the ball, and there's some kids that love playing with a Lego set. Okay, I think you've got to be the absolute. You have to live your life and support what they are and who they are and how they are. So I would say being supportive is critically important. There's no one on the planet that doesn't love someone supporting them, someone saying really good job, someone turning around and saying, boy, I love the way you're playing that video game. You're really a pro at it. I mean, it's their world. Let them be themselves too. I think that's half the problem today. I think, unfortunately, there are so many parents that read about, Justin Fields just signed a $40 million deal to be a backup quarterback in Kansas. My kid's going to be a Justin Fields. No, let your kid be who they are and support them. Parent as if your life depends on it, because it does.
I like that, because it does. Listen, Truett Cathy talked about encouragement. He said, "How do you know if someone needs encouragement?" And they're breathing. And
Yeah,
I appreciate your encouragement for me and my brothers. I appreciate the encouragement that you exude to anybody you come in contact with. You are a consummate encourager. Thank you for investing time for our listeners just to hear your story, your perspective. It's meaningful. It's important. And we just appreciate you. Kevin and I appreciate you very, very much. So thank you very much, Dad. An awesome few minutes with you. It means the world.
Well, let me far be it from me to say something before Kevin closes. Okay. But, I want to thank the two of you, because what you're doing is important. It's very, very important. You're doing your best to not only be better fathers yourself, but also to figure out a way that you can be a catalyst to someone else who needs it. And I also want to thank any of your listeners, because they're listening because they care enough to figure out a way that they can become better. So that's really wonderful stuff.
Well said.
I totally agree. Such an honor to spend time with you guys today. Next time, it's going to be in person with the three of us. So looking forward to that. Ira, as always, thank you for your wisdom. And Eric, honored to be on this journey with you.
Same here, man. Go Dads. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.